Swim Team, Captain 7 here. See this little gray box? If you were to take it and plug it straight into your TV, then I think you're bound to be at least a little bit disappointed by what it has to offer. In fact, this little gray box doesn't even have any of the games I grew up playing. And actually, out of its whole roster, it only actually has 2 games that I want to play now. And it only has 20 games altogether. But fret not, viewer. Thanks to the endeavors of dedicated fans around the world, that's not going to be an issue much longer. You see, when the Classic got announced, PlayStation fans worldwide rejoiced at the idea of revisiting some of their long-lost favorite games. But by the time the lineup was announced, fans went full,
"This is bull. A PlayStation for $70.
I saw them for $100.
That is ridiculous. All I got is 70. I want somebody else to talk to around here."
Honestly, I'm just really confused about a lot of the games they decided to put on here. Mainly stuff like Intelligent Cube or Jumping Flash, even really generic games like Destruction Derby. I mean seriously, I don't think many people have fond nostalgic memories of Street Puzzle Fighter 2. Like seriously, you're gonna put Street Puzzle Fighter on here when there's not even a real Street Fighter game in the lineup, but they still had the audacity and nerve to include this shit? Even before we knew the full lineup of games for the PlayStation Classic, I pretty much accepted that the full lineup would never include certain classic games like Spyro, Crash, and Tony Hawk, because the licensing issues would just be a nightmare. But that still doesn't explain why some really important and memorable first-party titles were left out as well. I'm talking about properties that Sony controls the rights to entirely, games like Parappa the Rappa and Medieval. And in fact, I'm pretty sure Medieval is even getting its own PlayStation 4 remake, so that makes it make even less sense. And there's so many other small little issues that the PlayStation Classic had that made it really confusing, like the fact that all the games run in PAL mode natively. They're locked in at 50Hz instead of the higher 60Hz that the NTSC versions offer. But fortunately, by modding the Classic, it's pretty easy to switch all of your games to NTSC mode. And if you've modded your console, then all you actually have to do is push select and triangle at the same time. And just like that, you can switch from NTSC to PAL, you can enable additional options like scan lines, and play with other additional settings as well. And honestly, these added additional options and the ability to play the games I actually want really makes the system worthwhile to me. But until you mod it, it's just a stupidly expensive gray paperweight. But I've got a really weird theory, so hear me out for a second. Maybe, just maybe, Sony released this product knowing fans would make it better themselves. So hear me out. This is where we cross over into fringe conspiracy theory territory, so get your tinfoil hats ready, folks, because we're about to turn the freaking frogs gay. Sony consoles have always had a long-running history of vulnerabilities that have often left the consoles open to exploitation and piracy. Just off the top of my head, there's the switch disk method on PlayStation 1, the Pandora's battery trick for PSP, swapping PlayStation 1 discs on a fat PlayStation 2, the list just goes on. And fortunately for us, the PlayStation Classic is no different from any of its predecessors. Personally, I found modding the PlayStation Classic to be the simplest and easiest modding experience of my entire life, and that makes it the perfect mod for any beginner to try. This mod can be performed extremely easily and painlessly, and in fact, it was so simple that I'm just going to take you through the steps right now. Step 1. Acquire a PlayStation Classic and 64GB flash drive. Step 2. YouTube How to Mod PlayStation Classic. I found this video by Mad Little Pixels to be the most helpful. I'll leave a link in the description down below. Step 3. After you get your PlayStation Classic to boot up into Auto Bleem, you're ready to load it up with your 100% completely legal, non-pirated ISOs that you definitely made from the discs you 100% own. Definitely. Piracy's bad. And just like that, in 3 simple steps and less than half an hour of work, your PlayStation Classic is ready to play all the games that are actually worth playing that Sony left out. But did Sony leave these out on purpose? I really think they did, but in order to explain why, I've got to take you back in time. Back to about 2009.
Like Boxy, aka Moldy Bread, she's a failure. Troll! I can't believe you guys believe that. Who actually talks like that? Not me.
You see, when I was about 12, one of my all-time favorite PlayStation 1 games just stopped working out of the blue one day. The disc was so scratched up, and I tried every solution I could to try and get rid of the scratches. But still, my PlayStation 2 met me with the red clouds of death every time I tried the disc. So for the first time in my life, I resorted to something a little bit unorthodox and mildly sketchy. I mean, it's still completely legal, but it's still a little sketchy. You see, there's this trick you can do with the PlayStation 2 to play backup copies of PlayStation 1 games. All you really need is a credit card,
your credit card number, the expiration date, month and year, and the 3-digit code on the back.
And I'm not going to come out right and explain how to do it, but you could probably find a tutorial pretty easily on YouTube. So I went and made a backup copy of my game, burned it to a blank disc, and then tried the trick, and within minutes I was swinging through a densely fogulated, polygonal turn-of-the-millennium New York City once more. Ever since then, I've gotten really interested in the video game modding community and the politics surrounding it. And one of the things I found out through that is that Sony products tend to be the most easily moddable out of the big 3 game companies. For comparison's sake, modding my 3DS took me over a week, and even after that it took me even longer to figure out how to run all the backup games.
All of which I definitely 100% own physically.
Compare that to modding my PlayStation Portable, which took less than 20 minutes after my PlayStation Portable was charged enough to turn on. Now, a big part of the reason I love PlayStation is definitely nostalgia, but the other part comes from something that's a little bit different. The other main reason I love PlayStation is, like I said earlier, the homebrew communities that surround it and the fact that PlayStations tend to be more easily moddable than other consoles. Fans put so much hard work and time into modding these consoles, and they do it all for the sake of game preservation and improving the hardware that the games run on. They do all this work for free, and for no reason other than just pure passion and dedication to the games that they love playing. Which I find to be a pretty pure-hearted artistic pursuit. But that brings us back to the PlayStation Classic, and something that's kind of interesting about the technology it's based on. The very base emulator for the PlayStation Classic was actually created by fans. It's an open source emulator that can be found online and utilized or modified by anyone, including Sony apparently. The emulator is called PCSX Rearmed, and it's actually the same technology that's used to run the PCSX PC PlayStation 1 emulator. So, TLDR, Sony used pre-existing, fan-made technology to create the PlayStation Classic. Which is an odd move, for sure, but I think it's pretty symbolic of something more than we realize right now. I mean, let's be real. We all know that the PlayStation Classic was just a blatant cash grab. They wanted to make as much money as quick as possible, and that's what they tried to do. And in doing so, they ended up avoiding getting a bunch of big licenses. I mean, think about it for a second. If fans have a history of modding Sony consoles to add and play whatever games they want, then why would you bother paying Activision for the licenses to games like Crash and Spyro, if you already know that hardcore fans are probably just going to mod Crash and Spyro on there regardless? So why bother paying for the license when fans will just put the games on there themselves anyway? What I'm getting at is that I think that maybe Sony knew the console would be modded, and maybe that's why they didn't license the more popular franchises and games that people actually wanted. I mean, think about it. Why would you waste millions of dollars licensing games like Crash and Spyro, when a lot of fans will find a way to play those games on the consoles regardless of if you pay up for it or not? The fact of the matter is that the fans were always in a position to exploit the system in a way that Sony never legally could. So, does that mean that Sony left the back door of their console open for fans to find? I think it does. Because fans ended up finding a way to play pirated games on the console within days of release.
Days.
All because the same technology that runs this little gray shitbox, PCSX Rearmed, is the same technology that runs an emulator that a lot of modders were already using. They were already familiar with the architecture, which made developing mods for the system exponentially easier as a result. And while I realize that no officials at Sony have ever officially condoned these practices, and full disclosure, they never would. I mean, why would they? But given how easy these exploits are to execute, and how much value they end up adding to the system, and given the fact that you can add pretty much any game you want once you do so, I feel like they left this back door open on purpose. I think Sony was hoping that the exploits would lead people to buying the consoles en masse, causing a supply chain issue. similar to what happened with the Nintendo Classics a few years ago. But unfortunately for Sony, this never happened, because even before launch, the Classic was panned by critics due to its poor library, and as a result of those poor sales, you can now find the PlayStation Classic for as low as 30 or 40 bucks. And in my opinion, that's actually exactly what this thing's worth. If you're willing to spend 20 minutes modding it, and then a little bit of extra time loading your video game backups onto it, then I think it's worth 30 or even 40 bucks. So if this is your niche, or if you've never modded before and you're interested in modding something for the first time, I'd definitely recommend getting a PlayStation Classic and modding it. There's still a lot of fun to be had through the console. You just have to really make the fun yourself instead of just taking it how it comes. And honestly, once you put in a little bit of work into it, it makes playing the games feel even more rewarding in my opinion. So with that being said, I'd like to know what you guys would have liked to have seen on the PlayStation Classic, and what were some of your favorite PlayStation games? Be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and liking the video, because it actually helps all of my content get seen in the future. And if you're interested in supporting the channel further, you can actually donate to our Ko-fi, our Streamlabs, or even our Amazon wishlist in the description down below. Anything helps, because we're trying to save up money for our camera and some other filming equipment at the moment. So with all that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching, Super Swim Team. Au revoir!